So welcome back in.
So they said I could have a chance to share how I got here. When I was about 16 years, I was not raised as a Christian. I was raised as a Unitarian Universalist. And this is their symbol with the flaming chalice of truth. And one thing that my parents both gave to me was a desire for truth. And my mother particularly had a desire to be truthful before God. And it was real important to her that when she was standing in church, she wasn't going to say she believed something that she didn't believe. Anyhow, I have had from both of them, they have planted in me a desire for truthfulness. And I have always been fascinated. From when I was a little kid, I was fascinated by the things that people believe and the things they believe about God. And I asked my mom lots and lots of questions, and she would give me as many answers as she knew how to give. And she would say, but when you grow up, you'll make your own decisions about what you believe about these things. And so I was thinking about this when I was about 16, and I'd heard lots of people talk about God. I decided God is a word that people start using when the question gets too big. So, who made the world? You know, no scientist can prove anything about that. That's just too big a question. So you put what I called the God stamp on it. What happens after death? Well, God. And I wasn't actually interested in either of those questions. I mean, now I would say God made the world, and I would say after death, God takes care of things. But I wasn't, at the age of 16, really interested in either of those questions. So I said to myself, do I have a God question? And I decided, after thinking about it a lot, that my God question was, what is my life supposed to be about? Because I thought my parents would answer that question by saying to serve other people. And I thought, you can get to the end of your life and people say, well, who asked you? I didn't know if there was a God. My father was an atheist. I didn't know if there was a God, which God it was. I was well aware of lots and lots of different beliefs. But I said, I think my God question is, what's my life supposed to be about? And my answer is, it's supposed somehow to be about God. And an amazing thing happened. At least I think it's pretty amazing. I'd talked to lots of Christians before then. I'd talked to lots of Christians who told me they believed what I thought was a pretty silly story, or at least unusual story, that God had become a man and come to this earth and died, and somehow that had to do with our sins. I thought that was, and he came back to life again. I thought that was a pretty strange story. And they told me that they believed that story because their parents told them. And I thought, that's not a very good reason to believe a story like that. Well, as soon as I came to the conclusion that my life was supposed to be about God, I started running into people who believed this Jesus story because they'd had some kind of an encounter with Jesus, and Jesus had changed their life. And I talked with one of them for hours and hours and hours. It was a friend I knew from school. And every time that I decided I had had enough of talking about that, God would send somebody else. And I remember getting angry about that, frankly. But I was finished talking about this, but now there's somebody else telling me pretty much the same story. Anyhow, so I finally got to the place where I said, God, if all this stuff about Jesus is really true, then I want in on it. And I realized I had come to a place where if I said I didn't believe in Jesus, I would have this sense that I was lying. And I didn't want to lie. And then, that's not the standard prayer. You listen to any radio preacher, that is not the prayer that they tell you to pray. So I probably spent close to a year listening to radio preachers and praying the prayer they wanted me to pray afterwards, just to be sure I was really a Christian. I find it to be a pattern in my life that I don't always do things the standard way, and I think that that's okay. One of the things about me is that when I think about something long enough, I wind up getting a song. And so recently I wrote this song, but I think it reflects what I was thinking about as I came to Jesus. You are my center and you are my core, the ground of my being, what I'm living for. Help me stay certain when I'm feeling weary that you make it all worthwhile. You are the one that I'm running the race for, and you are the one that I run to embrace. Help me remember when I'm feeling shaken that you make it all worthwhile. King of all kings on the throne of my heart, the Lamb that was slain and my light in the dark, all of my days as long as I'm living, you make it all worthwhile. You make it all worthwhile. So I went to Princeton. At Princeton, I met the man that I married 47 years ago. And he would be here except that he's got a conference in Madison, Wisconsin. And while I was there, we joined a church that met in homes. It was called Princeton Fellowship Church. It was a church that had a lot of strengths, and it was a church that had a lot of weaknesses, which I'm not going to go into. Sometime when you've got 2 or 3 days, I'll sit down and talk about it. But we came back to Princeton after my husband finished medical school. We came back to the general area so that we could be part of that church again. And as I say, there were strengths and there were weaknesses. After a period of time, our pastor left the church, which was a good thing. And I was part of the team that my husband and I were both part of the team that was leading the church. And while that was the case, I really felt God saying to my heart, I call you a pastor, do the work. And I said, my understanding of the Bible does not allow women to be pastors. What are you going to do about that, God? If this is you, you're going to have to fix that. But I figured doing the work was the part that I really had to move into. And what I think God means by do the work is that he gave some people to be pastors and teachers to equip the saints for the work of the ministry. So you guys are the saints, and the work of the ministry is all of ours to do. It's not just a pastor standing up front who does the God stuff. It's all of us who are called to do the work of the ministry. And so, what did I do? I did what I could. I asked people, does this make sense? It's this word, I call you a pastor, that's for all of us on the leadership team, right? And they said, don't think so. But I worked to heal the wounds of the people who were there. We had high hopes that God would change our church and lead us onward. But after a while, everybody in leadership felt that we were supposed to close that church down. So just about my first sermon was why we are closing this church. And I figured, okay, that's the end of this pastor business. Moved to Washington Crossing Church, which many of you know. And God spent about a year saying, no, I still call you a pastor. I ended up going to seminary. In 2006, I graduated with my MDiv, which is the pastor's working degree, the same way that an MD is the doctor's working degree. But it also became really clear that I am not called by God to lead a regular denominational church. So what the church calls a pastor and what God calls me to do, or what God means when he calls me a pastor, they're not the same thing. And I really was okay with that. You know, okay, God, what do I do? I walked out what I was supposed to do, I think. I mostly taught Sunday school. I wrote Sunday school curriculum and vacation Bible school curriculum and stuff like that. So that was fine. And then I wound up coming here. And all of a sudden, I said, I'm not in a regular denominational church. And all of this, God calls me a pastor, came fountaining up to the top. And I went to Pierre and said, I think at some point I'm supposed to be a pastor of Celebration Movement, a co-pastor. I do not want... Anyhow, the Bible is not real clear about how in the early church they made pastors. As near as I can tell, the elders in the area got together and prayed over the people. Sometimes maybe they anointed them with oil, but they laid hands on them and prayed for them. And there are 3 people, one of whom does not seem to be here, and that's okay too. But there are 3 people who aren't the people from this fellowship that I really wanted to ask from other parts of my life to come and pray for me. One is George Clash, who is currently the lead pastor at Washington Crossing. And I got to know George I was leading a trip to India. And then I worked under George when he was head of children's ministry, and now he's the head pastor. Whoops. Yvonne, who leads a wonderful women's Bible study that leads people deeper into the Lord. And she's been mentoring me for a bunch of years now, and really gave me a word a few years back encouraging me that God was going to give me more songs. And my husband says, that's not a word that requires very much faith, if you know me. Because God keeps giving me songs. But I'll tell you, and I want to say this as an encouragement, because her saying that to me really opened up something in me. Even though God was giving me songs all along, it gave me so much confidence to really spend time with the Lord asking for more songs. So don't not say something that somebody might say, oh, that's obvious. And then Jim Frank, also sitting here. A bunch of years ago, I was asking God whether there was some small part I could play in healing the wounds that Christians inflicted on Native Americans. And I thought, well, one thing I can do is teach something accurate. I was going to be teaching great world religions. I can learn something accurate to teach. And I wound up at Malvern Sweat Lodge, where Jim leads a bunch of people in praying in a way that a Native American mystic named Joseph Rael taught him. And Joseph Rael felt that the land was crying out for ceremony, and he opened up several types of ceremonies for people from all backgrounds in the world, and encouraged Jim to teach the things that he had been teaching, which includes the Sweat Lodge and several dances. And thanks to Jim, I've learned to pray in the Sweat Lodge, and I did it initially to have something to teach and to pray into this business of could I have a piece in healing the wounds. What I do is I have this book. It's out on the table. You guys can pick up a copy or I'll get you a copy. It's all in the realm of prayer, is all that I'm doing in that area. But I am so grateful to Jim for being my elder in that area, and I heard him say that he's launched a lot. He was like a bow that launches the arrows of people who pour sweat lodges and people who do the dances. And I'm so grateful to him for launching me in that area, and today helping launch me in this area. Going back to this business of what's the job of being a pastor, to equip the saints for the work of the ministry so that the body of Christ may be built up until we all reach the unity in the faith and in the knowledge of the Son of God and become mature, attaining to the whole measure of the fullness of Christ. So I think that's the calling that all of us have, to reach individually and as a group the whole measure of the fullness of Christ. I think that may take a while, but I do believe that that's the goal. I think my next steps in that are that I really want to get to know each of you that at least is part of Celebration Movement. We're a small church. There's no reason I shouldn't be able to really get to know everybody here. So I'm going to work on that. We'll see. I have one more song to sing you. Feel free to join in. Pressing forward, pressing in, pressing on to lay hold of that for which Jesus laid hold of me. pressing forward, pressing in, pressing on to lay hold of that for which Jesus laid hold of me. Draw me, draw me, draw me, and I will run after. Draw me, and I will run after you. Help me to be more like Jesus. What does it mean today to carry my cross? Help me keep my eyes on the target and follow whatever the cost. Pressing forward, pressing in, pressing on to lay hold of that for which Jesus laid hold of me. Pressing forward, pressing in, pressing on to lay hold of that for which Jesus laid hold of me. Draw me, draw me, draw me, and I will run after. Draw me, and I will run after you. I will run after you.